All right, a lot of people are still talking, and the buzz is around, all around the world in terms of the Catholic religion, of course, but elsewhere on top of that, because the Pope and the Church wields a lot more power than just the religion per se. Now, when Pope Bergoglio came in from Argentina, he obviously had a mandate, and that mandate was to tear down the Catholic Church, revise it, redefine it, reformat it, and the question, I guess, might most quickly be phrased in the term of how much damage did Bergoglio do to the Church, and how close are we to getting it back when he appoints 80% of the people who are going to actually choose his successor? What are the chances of the rank and file Catholics and the Church as a whole getting a fair shake? There are a lot of things to think about. Father Paul Kramer has kindly offered to come on tonight. He is with us right now. When we look at what just happened over Easter, the Pope certainly couldn't die on Easter Sunday. He had to die on Easter Monday. It would have been bad form to mess up Easter Sunday. So I wonder, the obvious thing to question and ponder would be, was he escorted out on Easter Monday to kind of wrap it up as it would appear to be most politically advantageous to do, the day after Easter? Who knows? There's so much going on here. Father Kramer, thank you for being here. Thank you for getting up as always. We have spent a couple of years at least now really assaying and analyzing this Pope. He's gone now, and certainly real Catholics, I don't think, should mourn his passing at all. That's me speaking, not you. Welcome back.
Well, it's great to be back, and you don't have to say it's only you speaking, because I share the same sentiment. This man has inflicted unprecedented damage on the Church, and not that I wish any evil upon anyone, but the Church needed to be freed of this evil man who has been oppressing the Church for so long.
Yes.
But one thing you said that is interesting is that, of course, it would be very bad form for him to have died on Easter Sunday. This is something very interesting. A friend of mine in Italy who's very well connected internationally, he heard from a friend in Moscow, and he said this is a very credible individual in Moscow.
Mm-hmm.
8 p.m. Sunday evening, the Russian state media, it was announced that Bergoglio had died.
Oh, yeah. Well, they held the formal announcement back then, pretty obviously.
Because Bergoglio was putting forth this idea that God had rescued him from the jaws of death. So Easter Sunday, the day of Christ's resurrection, and it was almost a sort of a resurrection for him to regain his health and be back on the job and make a public appearance on Easter morning. And then he dies like this on Easter Sunday evening. That wouldn't go over too well.
No, Go ahead.
On the day of Christ's resurrection, that he doesn't participate in the rising to new life, but to death forever, I think.
Well, a lot of people would agree. What you said is very interesting. He has done truly enormous damage to the Church, and it's not just him. And I did mention that allegedly, I don't have the hardcore proof of it, but 80% of the people who will be involved in choosing his successor, which may have already been done, were appointed by him. He stacked the court, so to speak, to adjudicate in his favor in terms of a successor. Anything to that? What do you know about that?
Well, my first comment about that is, have you seen the email I sent you about 10 minutes ago?
I've just got it open here. Let me pull the story up. It comes from a pretty good site. Freemasonic Lodge, the Freemasons, hails Pope Francis' work as, quote, deeply resonant, end quote, with their, the Freemasons, principles. Well, what do you know? The Grand Master of the Lodge pointed out that, quote, freedom, equality, and fraternity, elevated as societal ideals in Francis' Fratelli Tutti, are the three core values of Freemasonry. What a funny overlapping there. Well, good. this is wild.
I recall when he went to the Philippines, the biggest major daily newspaper had I think it was a full-page advertisement welcoming him to the Philippines. I mean, the Freemasons loved this man.
Yeah, got it.
When I first learned that Bergoglio had died, I was scrolling through my email, and I saw a headline about this Pope dying, and how friendly he was, favorable he was to Jewish interests. I learned about it first from the Jewish Telegraphic Association.
Uh-huh.
So
Well, he certainly was a friend of the Jews. No doubt. No doubt. And I don't recall any single event during his tenure where that was negative about Jews and Jewish interests. No. I don't think so.
So here's a man who was promoting Freemasonic principles and Jewish interests, and he's the one appointed all these cardinals.
Mm-hmm.
The establishment media, the corporate media, and they're all saying, for them it's business as usual. Like the old saying in Rome, one pope dies and they make another one. Mortum papa sine fa un altro.
That sounds right to me. Here's another little tidbit from that article you just sent me. Let me read this. This is a quote. Coming from the end of the world, meaning Argentina is far away from the center of things, Jorge Mario, is it Mario or Maria Bergoglio? I've got it Mario here. I think it's
Mario.
All right, it is. Jorge Mario Bergoglio was able to change the church, bringing the revolutionary teachings of St. Francis of Assisi back to present day. Romoli, despite a fundamental difference between St. Francis' fidelity to the Catholic doctrine and Francis' revolution of heterodoxy. Romoli went on to praise Francis' work as deeply resonant with the principles, this is worth a repeat, of Freemasonry, a compliment which is especially significant considering that Freemasonry has been repeatedly and infallibly condemned by past popes as antithetical to Catholicism, which it is. It's starting back in 1738 with Pope Clement XII's papal bull in Eminenti. Go ahead.
Yes, and Freemasonry was forcefully condemned by Pope Leo XIII, where he said that their principles being carried out would absolutely destroy the church if that were possible. So now we have a man, Bergoglio, who is no surprise that he's promoting an agenda based on Freemasonic principles, because, as I said before, he was a Freemason himself. And
that's true. Yes, in Argentina.
My source on this, as I said before, was Cardinal Renato Martino. He was himself a Freemason. He has named like-minded people to be cardinals.
Mm-hmm.
As I explained in the past, as a heretic, a man who was publicly and formally corrected for his heresy by a large number of priests and even bishops and theology professors, he just rejected that with contempt. That is what is called being incorrigible.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
He was an incorrigible heretic. He was called out for his heresy by people who are competent to do so, and he just contemptuously rejected correction. So he was an incorrigible heretic, and according to the teaching of the Church,
mm-hmm.
such a man is incapable of even being a pope.
How did the Church gets pulled away from dogma and doctrine of 2,000 years and allow this to happen? That's another question that people seem to want to answer.
Well, the one who's talking about that now most clearly is Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano. Archbishop Vigano points out that where the origin of this evil, of this malady in the Church,
right?
It all comes out of the Second Vatican Council.
What years were those?
From 1962 to 1965.
Okay.
It began with Pope John the 23rd. He was the one who convoked the council. When he was dying, he said, "For God's sake, stop the council." But the man who succeeded him was Paul VI, was Montini. In the family plot where they have this family graves, you see the Masonic symbolism, Masonic and Jewish symbolism on the tombs of his ancestors. His mother was Jewish, at least externally, outwardly converted to Catholicism.
Here's another little point I found in the article you sent me. It is noteworthy that as St. Maximilian Kolbe, 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 testified in his Militia of the Immaculata magazine, the Freemasons in 1917 celebrated their bicentennial by marching in front of St. Peter's Square in the Vatican with banners declaring Satan must reign in the Vatican. The Pope will be his slave. End quote. St. Kolbe elaborated in 1939, quote, this moral hatred for the Church of Jesus Christ and for his vicar was not just a prank on the part of deranged individuals, but a systematic action proceeding from the principle of Freemasonry. Quote, destroy all religion, whatever it may be, especially the Catholic religion. When you talk Freemasons, you can include international Zionist Judaism as well. It's right there.
Monsignor George Dillon wrote in his work on Freemasonry, explaining that there were two lodges in London, such high-ranking lodges of Freemasonry, that no Gentile Mason was allowed to even enter those buildings, to those lodges. Those are for Jewish only. It's not a mystery why it's referred to as Judeo-Masonry.
Shouldn't be. Understood. Yes, I got it. Well, interesting. So he did exercise bad form and checked out on Easter Sunday, and they just let him say, well, he was taking a nap, and we found him in the morning, and he was gone. If you saw the little video clip of Vice President Vance meeting the pontiff only hours before he died, I mean, literally hours, a few hours, he looked like he was already checking out. He was not there. Vance grabbed his hand, right hand, shook his hand, and said something like, what an honor it is to meet you. And then he said, I pray for you all the time. And then patted him with his left hand on his shoulder. Good job. You don't touch the Pope like that. I found that odd. Not that Bergoglio was worthy of any higher decorum than that. We have Vigano, who has put forth a statement. I think 5 points he made. Can you quantify any of those for us?
Archbishop Vigano pointed out that Bergoglio is not something in isolation that has happened. That Bergoglio is the fruit of the Second Vatican Council. This is what the Second Vatican produced.
Got it.
And that's why the situation we have in the church is anything but normal, to put it mildly. It's not going to be business as usual. All the daily newspapers and such and the media are talking about who's going to be the next pope, as if they're all going to get together, just like they always do in the past, and elect a new pope. And then we just get on with it. Well, it's not going to happen that way. There are several possible scenarios, and none of them are going to be the normal thing. What I consider not to be likely, but what I would hope for, something like what happened with the election of Pope Benedict XVI.
Okay.
There was already such disorder in the church. When Cardinal Ratzinger spoke in such terms as wanting to reestablish the discipline of the church and restore some doctrinal sanity to the church, it resonated with the Cardinals, and they elected him. The Sankt Gallen Mafia were not pleased with that. The Masonic party among the Cardinals were not pleased with that. They wanted one of their own to become Pope. I remember one of the cardinals, Belgian or Dutch, I can't remember which, from the Low Countries, he was asked by a TV commentator, what do you think of this new pope, meaning Benedict XVI? And he said, oh, this pontificate won't last more than 3 years.
That was about right, wasn't it?
Then they asked the Archbishop, I forgot to think of his name, at the time the Archbishop of London Archdiocese. He just simply said, we didn't get our man. Yeah, their man was Bergoglio. They got Ratzinger. They were not pleased with that. But the thing is, the cardinals wanted to restore some degree of sanity to the church. Things were unraveling toward the end of the reign of John Paul II, as they would, because these men were the product of Vatican II. Paul VI was the great revolutionary who started this revolution that's destroying the church. And John Paul II carried it on, unfortunately. John Paul II and Ratzinger, they were so much in favor of Vatican II that they never understood that Vatican II is the poison destroying the church. So now I'm hoping the cardinals, those cardinals who are Catholic, will come to the understanding that we need a complete reversal. We have to restore Catholicism, and that means we have to scrap Vatican II entirely. Vatican II has to go.
Can that be done by decree?
Yes, it can. It can't be done by a simple decree. A papal decree can scrap it. And it has to be done. A high-ranking Vatican prelate even told me that Vatican II has to be overturned. But
you have such extraordinarily deep sources and connections. People listen very carefully to what you say all around the world. Now, this Bergoglio was obviously a ringer. He was not a man of great spirit, spirituality, of proper doctrine at all. He was a World Economic Forum puppet. He was certainly a Freemason, and he was also involved with, we'll have to lay it out, I'm speaking again for myself here, International Zionism was a major factor there. He was not a good person at all. He was furthermore a proponent of climate change. He pushed the COVID scamdemic. This man was evil in many ways. You knew that, and I learned it after having you on the program. But this guy is hopefully not mourned by anyone of proper mind and spirit in the church at this point. He did massive damage. And if they do succeed in replacing him with someone of like mind, things are going to get worse. If he did, in fact, pick 80% of the cardinals who are going to elect his successor, can the 20% of the cardinals that he didn't select, if these are true figures and they seem to come from good sources, can they rise up, put a stop to this at this point and say, no, not on my watch, you're not going to get away with this? Is there going to be some real serious backroom fighting going on here?
I can see it happening because if they elect someone like Marx, who was at least as a more radical than Bergoglio, if that's conceivable, those who are Catholic in the hierarchy and among the College of Cardinals, they simply are going to say that this man is not a Catholic. He's a heretic. He can't be a valid pope. On the other side, if the cardinals, in spite of being made cardinal by Bergoglio, if there are enough of them, if there's a high enough percentage of them who are of the Catholic faith,
right,
they could align with the most conservative of all the cardinals, the ones who are known to be the most traditionally minded cardinals, and they could elect a staunch Catholic, a man with the purity of the Catholic faith and with the mind to restore the discipline of the church. That would be a great thing. Now, there are some Catholics who are really disoriented about this. They simply say that, well, according to the conclave law, the laws governing papal elections are going to say if a false pope, invalid cardinals, then because these men are not valid cardinals, they're not capable of electing a valid pope. And therefore they say, a valid pope cannot be elected. And that's nonsense. That is absolute nonsense. These people, I don't like to use this term because it's often abused, but they don't know how to think outside of the box. And this box, I'm talking about simple statutory law.
Got it.
Statutory law is not absolute. There are exceptions to statutory law. And when we have divine law and natural law, that trumps merely statutory law. And statutory law admits so much because it is the very principles of law, the principles of canon law, the principles of Roman law. It goes back many centuries, and it's explained by the two greatest doctors of the Church after the Council of Trent, that's St. Robert Bellarmine and St. Alphonsus Liguori, and by Pope Gregory XVI, that if the papal monarchical governance of the Church, the rule of law under the Pope, if that should break down, then the Church reverts to a more primitive form of law. So if the conclave laws instituted by the Pope become inoperable, it's not like there can never be a Pope elected again. We look back in history, already happened. At the Council of Constance, you had invalid cardinals who were included
which we may have this time a substantial number of.
Yes. We already had this happen before in 1417 because there were three claimants. There was Pope Gregory XII. He was the true Pope. There was a man going by the name of Benedict XIII, who was an anti-pope. And there was a man by the name of John XXIII, who was an anti-pope. And all these men had named cardinals. So who are the cardinals who are going to elect the new pope? They got themselves into a position when all the followers of the three claimants were in agreement that they would elect a new pope. But they had to choose electors from the three groups. So a good number of the electors were not valid cardinals. But it was the Council of Constance, which was convoked officially by Pope Gregory XII, that appointed the electors. And because the governance of the Church, the election laws could not be implemented, the papal rule of the Church broke down. They had to revert to a council to appoint the electors, and they elected Pope Martin V. And, of course, the subsequent Church history has established it as a dogmatic fact that he was a valid pope. So the Catholics have to get this idea out of their heads that if this was an invalid pope, his cardinals are invalid, and if his cardinals are invalid, they can't elect a valid pope. They're saying because the papacy is permanent, they have to be valid cardinals, otherwise you could never have a pope validly elected. That just shows how skewed are the minds of these people. They have this skewed legalism that makes them not understand that that's not the teaching of the Church. If all of his cardinals are not valid, then it would be impossible for the Church to elect a pope. No, all of his cardinals are invalid. All the ones that he appointed are indeed invalid. But does that stop them from electing a true pope? The answer is no. The reason why is because an invalid papal election can be remedied. There are things that in law can be remedied. An invalid
papal election can be remedied. All right, go on.
There are things in law that are irremediable, and they cannot be remedied. And there are things that can be remedied. And things like an invalid papal election, things like an invalid marriage can be remedied. And the process is called sanatio in radice, which is to say, literally, it means healing at the root. Something that is invalid at the very root of it that makes it invalid, that circumstance can be corrected. If that circumstance can be corrected, like with the invalid papal election, then the man becomes a valid pope. If it cannot be remedied, for example, if the man is an incorrigible heretic, then his election cannot be remedied.
There's another comment here by the Freemasons, and always when you think Freemasons, think International Zionism influenced. This particular Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Italy had this to say as a conclusion. Pope Francis has been able to combine faith and reason, complementary dimensions of human experience, renewing the Anselmian principle of credo. You'll have to finish it for me. Ut intelligum, credo ut intelligum.
Credo ut intelligam. I believe so that I may understand. That principle is very much abused because what is believed in faith, strictly speaking, proper mysteries of faith are beyond the powers of the human intellect to grasp. We cannot believe in order to understand. For example, we cannot understand the mystery of the Holy Trinity, that there can be three persons in one God, beyond the power of the human mind to grasp it.
Understand.
We can only believe it.
Got it. Let me finish this little bit here. He goes on to say, a faith capable of questioning, welcoming, this is speaking about Bergoglio by the Freemasons, a faith capable of questioning, welcoming doubt and dialogue, which we also find in the Masonic initiatory method, founded on a path free of dogma, substantiated by the unceasing search for truth. These are the Freemasons talking. Bergoglio's pontificate has placed the last at the center, along with care for the planet and a development ethic based on human dignity. Care for the planet, number one, and a development ethic based on human dignity. This too can be found in the Masonic construction of the inner temple, based on tolerance, solidarity, resistance against hatred and ignorance, and finds a profound correspondence in Bergoglio's pastoral ministry, which, with its gentle revolution, has shown that humility and dialogue are tools of authentic strength. There you go. It goes on from there, but that's the kind of Freemasons heaping praise on this fraud. Please go ahead.
What I found particularly interesting there was the choice of words. The Grand Master spoke free of dogma.
Got it. That's sticking out like a flashing neon sign. I got it. Free of dogma. Pastoral. A pastoral church. The earth is God, right? Go ahead.
The Masonic books have always spoken of dogma-free Christianity. That's the revolution they want in the church. Dogma-free Christianity. A so-called Christianity without dogmas.
What do you have then?
Well, you don't have Christianity without dogmas.
No. They lay it right out. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about this. They're not making anything easier. They're signaling that they're going to do what they can with their influence to continue Bergoglio's mission, assignment. I think that's what I'm reading here. There's a lot of revelation in this writing when you think about it carefully. Someone who's written in, who is a Catholic, and has asked if I would present a couple of questions to you. My two questions for Father Paul Kramer are as follows. Number one, are you familiar with the traditional Catholic's claim that the Sister Lucia, in her later life appearances, were of an impostor claiming to be her? Please expound on any relevant understandings you have in this regard, including of how the third secret was diminished on its face, apparently by an alleged impostor. Is this something you want to talk about at all?
Really briefly, because it's not quite on the point of what we've been discussing tonight. It is interesting insofar as there was a forensic expert who examined, for example, the photographs.
Yes.
And came to the conclusion that these are two different individuals, two different people. And I wrote a letter to Sister Lucia back in the 80s, and I received an answer, and I handed it over to a court-accredited handwriting expert, a forensic expert for handwriting.
Gotcha.
In fact, not just handwriting, forensic scientist.
Mm-hmm.
His conclusion was the person who signed the letter was not the same person who signed the earlier letters.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, there seems to be some truth to that there was, that's putting it mildly, that there was an imposter. But
all right, very good. And the second part, could you please explain the brown scapular worn by Catholics, including Mel Gibson, as to its promise and required prayer that completes the compact?
I don't know what they mean by required prayer.
What is a brown scapular?
A scapular is a part of a religious habit. And so this is the Carmelite habit. The scapular of the Carmelite habit is that piece of cloth that covers, that hangs from the shoulders over both sides of the body.
Okay.
So the miniature one that people wear, so it's just a small square representing those two.
The large one. Okay.
Those large pieces of cloth that hang from the shoulders. And people who are enrolled into the scapular are incorporated in some way into the Carmelite order. Even though they don't become Carmelites, they're associated with the Carmelite order and receive the benefits of the habit. And one of the promises made by the Blessed Virgin Mary to St. Simon Stock was that whoever dies wearing that scapular will not suffer the fires of hell. So,
all right.
The grace is given to people wearing the scapular like a miraculous grace of repentance before they die. It's a very powerful sacramental of the Church. It's highly recommended. When I received my first communion, that was before the Second Vatican Council, we were all enrolled in the scapular on the day of our first communion, because that was the common practice before Vatican II. I don't know if they still do that now, but at least among traditional Catholics, it's still done. But it used to be in just about every parish everywhere, that was the practice, because scapular was something very highly promoted in the Church. So
okay, well, thank you. Yeah, thank you for the answers. I hope that takes care of it. We need to get back to the passing of the Pope, Bergoglio, and the Bergoglians, who are now behind. He moves on wherever he goes, probably down below rather than upward. We'll see. What is the time frame now in terms of what's going on? What would your best guess be if 80% of the cardinals now were appointed by Bergoglio? We'll call them Bergoglians. And what is their tactic now? If it's 80-20, they seem to have a decided advantage at this point in terms of a successor. Your thoughts?
I'm looking to Catholic prophecy, the prophecies of the saints, for example, to shed some light on this question, because the situation is far too volatile to be easily predictable. So you mentioned Sister Lucia Fatima, and that brings us right into the third secret of Fatima.
Yes. By the way, for all of you listening, Father Paul Kramer is one of the world's foremost authorities on the third secret. Go ahead, Father Kramer.
Padre Pio of Pietrelcina, St. Pio, received the revelation from the Virgin Mary herself. He received it directly. That the third secret of Fatima. In the third secret of Fatima, it is revealed that there would be a counterfeit church, that Satan has infiltrated into the church, into the very bosom of the church, and that there would be a counterfeit church. And
that's precisely what Bergoglio has been trying to create.
Exactly what he's doing. Not just trying, he has created the Synodal Church.
Right.
And it was Cardinal Oddi, it was Cardinal Ciappi, who spoke of the third secret of Fatima, prophesying the great apostasy in the church would begin at the top. This is not just something in the Fatima secret. This is not just something in the message of Our Lady of Fatima, but it is the ancient fathers of the church. And they say this unanimously. And this was pointed out by a great Catholic scholar by the name of Cardinal Henry Edward Manning in 1861. And in his book on the crisis of the Holy See, I can't remember the exact title of the book, I've quoted it in both of my volumes of To Deceive the Elect. He explains that the ancient fathers say that Rome will revert to its ancient paganism and will drive out the true vicar of Christ. The true pope will be driven out. There will be a true pope. The Blessed Virgin did reveal to Blessed Elena Aiello that for the sake of the pope, God would spare Rome from destruction. So we see in the third secret of Fatima, the vision of the secret, that the pope fleeing from a partially destroyed city. Now, Pope St. Pius X twice spoke of a vision he had where he saw a pope who had his same name. So this, I think, would be Pius XIII, because he was Pius X, and he says, I see my successor by name fleeing from the Vatican over the bodies of his brethren. So his brother priests are going to be killed in the Vatican, and he sees the Pope fleeing from Rome. And that is what he sees is what was foretold by the ancient fathers and pointed out by Cardinal Manning. The Pope is going to be driven out of Rome. So there will be a Pope. There will be a true Pope, but there's also going to be a false Pope. How this will come about is too difficult for me to say now. Either a staunch Catholic Pope will be elected and the more radical members of the hierarchy will go into schism and elect their own Pope, or it will be the other way around. The Bergoglian cardinals might elect someone who was so radically, manifestly heretical that will be so clearly not a Catholic, or may be elected and accelerate the heretical reforms of Bergoglio to such an extent they abolished the Catholic Mass and sacraments and completely abolished the Catholic religion and replace it with what is very obviously a paganized false religion. Then, of course, the Catholics will flee from that false church.
It sounds like either civil war or, yes, fleeing, as you're mentioning. Yeah, that's not going to work.
That Catholic remnant of the hierarchy and of the cardinals will elect a valid Catholic Pope. Because a heretic cannot be Pope. And one who was suspected of heresy, and I mean according to what are called the indicia of heresy, the very evidence which qualifies as seriously being suspect of heresy, that canonically creates doubt. And if the person is a doubtful Pope, Catholics can't accept him as a Pope.
No. Thank you again for being here, as you have so many times, and to give direction and hope and light to this very dark scenario we're in right now. We're going to stay on top of this. We're going to follow it right to we're going to follow it all the way through. So thank you on behalf of people all around the world who do appreciate you and your work and your scholarship and your faith as well. Thank you, Father Kramer.
Bye now.
We will continue to watch this unfold. It's a big deal. It's intimately involved with the most powerful people on the planet, what's going on right now. And we'll watch it.